All right, gentlemen, we thank you very much for being here. And as we have seen this morning, as we'll see over the next day and a half, once these discussions get started, I don't have to do much on the stage. This is great. I not only get to listen, but we get to learn. So I'm all good on that. I will ask you just to sort of baseline your individual roles, but I will sort of provide or remind the audience of the stage that we're trying to set. Given what is the collaboration network and the organization of how IJIS does its work, we'd like to understand that the operational priorities are defined, that the challenges are known to us so that we could help prioritize those, that we have a vision or an understanding of how the data issues can be reached or sought or collected, and that, of course, we know from a reality perspective, we need to secure that data. That was the rationale for bringing these contributors and these leaders and these thought leaders to the panel to be able to tell us that story. So, gentlemen, I'm going to ask that each of you speak a little bit about your individual backgrounds, and if you could just give us 5 or 10 minutes on your organizational mission. I know that for each of you, again, with COPS, with BJS, with DHS CISA, there is extreme information that is available that speaks to that larger strategy that the IJIS community in particular is very interested in. And as we go through the process and I pose some questions, we'll certainly highlight those. So Rob, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure. Does this work?
It's working.
So thank you so much for having us, and I want to express our appreciation for the opportunity on behalf of our COPS director, our politically appointed director, Hugh Clements. And I mention our director purposefully because it's an important feature of the COPS office that we've historically always had someone at the leadership helm who comes from the policing profession, who comes to us as a law enforcement leader. We think that's incredibly important. It makes us unique as a Department of Justice component. And we think that it provides sort of a direct conduit to DOJ and DOJ leadership, certainly us as staff from the law enforcement profession, and make sure that we're grounded based on the needs of the field and the priorities of the field. So it is important to us. Director Clements spent 40 years with the Providence Police Department, the last 12 of which he served as the chief of police there. My background is I've been at COPS since shortly after it was stood up back in 1996. Prior to that, I worked for the Police Executive Research Forum, worked on a variety of applied research projects for PERF and also supported their executive search process and managed government affairs. So worked at PERF for about 3.5 years and then came over to COPS in 1996. I currently am the deputy director. I've been the deputy director for 7 or 8 years, overseeing our technical assistance, training, portfolios, applied research, all of our publications and resources that we produce, as well as our convening function. So we do have some grant programs, which I'll talk about in a bit under my directorate. My directorate does not manage our COPS hiring program, which is our flagship program, of course, but we work closely to support that. In terms of the priorities, our priorities are really the many of the things that we heard Chief Greenwald talk about. A lot of common themes. Of course, with virtually every law enforcement agency and group that we meet with, there are some pretty consistent themes. Challenges with recruitment, hiring, and retention. Attrition is a huge problem, folks leaving the profession for reasons that Chief Greenwald spoke about. And challenges bringing new folks into the profession. So recruitment, hiring, and retention is certainly a priority. Technology, something that's important to you. Law enforcement technology is listed among the top 3 sort of issues and challenges with every single agency that we meet with. Historically, the COPS office had a pretty robust technology program, which some of you may remember or be familiar with. It was the COPS Making Officer Redeployment Effective. Basically, we would fund time savings technologies. We had about $1.5 billion in funding over about 7 years. That funding has dried up, and of course, we can't lobby, we can't advocate, but certainly with the practitioners and the law enforcement leaders and other stakeholders that we talk to, we convey the challenges from the field that we're hearing about. And I do think your all's voices matter. We're meeting with agencies that are still using some of the same technologies that we funded 15 years ago, which is really just crazy that there isn't a greater investment for state, county, and local law enforcement agencies in technology. And then violent crime reduction is certainly a big challenge, and we'll talk a little bit more about how our programs are being tailored to that. And then finally, whether you want to call it police reform, we sort of use reform, small r, which includes a lot of the challenges that the chief talked about, as well as some of the bigger capital R reform issues that we're seeing in some legislation and recent executive order about a year ago that I'll talk more about in a bit. A lot of those topics and issues are being sent to the COPS office to incorporate in our programs in various ways, and I'll talk a little bit more about how we're trying to accomplish that, mostly through incentives as opposed to directives to state and locals. So that's a quick overview of the priorities of the COPS office at this point.
I thank you very much. If we could ask Principal Deputy Director Scott, Kevin, if you wouldn't mind. That's a long title, if you don't mind.
We can cut off a couple phrases.
I appreciate it.
Good morning. I'm Kevin Scott. I'm with the Bureau of Justice Statistics, and I also bring greetings from our director, Dr. Alex Picaro, who is our political appointee and who has been with us since last August. I've been in my role at BJS since March, but I've been with the agency since 2017, so not quite as long as Rob. And in my time at BJS, most of my career was spent overseeing our law enforcement data collections, so this is a nice audience for me to be in. But in my current role, I oversee all of our statistical collections, and one of the things that I've been thinking about, particularly over the past couple of years, is that I think, like much of criminal justice, our data collections are siloed, and we collect data from law enforcement agencies, we collect data from courts, we collect data from prosecutors, we collect data from departments of correction, but we don't see kind of across the range. And I think that that's both an operational consideration, and that's a consideration for understanding the changes in criminal justice, is being able to understand the movement of people through the criminal justice system and better understanding where the pain points are and where the weaknesses of the system are. And so that has been something that I've been interested in. That dovetails nicely with Director Picaro's priorities, which are to modernize data collection. We understand, particularly in a time when criminal justice agencies, including law enforcement agencies, are short-staffed, asking them to complete survey after survey after survey can be a really difficult lift. And so we want to be kind of cognizant of the burden that we impose. Everybody knows the need for data, but we can figure out ways to make that provision of that data as easy as possible, and then we feel that our job is to kind of harmonize that data and make it actionable at the national level. And so our second goal, or Director Picaro's second goal, is to make the data more accessible. I'm an academic by training. My background is in the courts, and I've worked for the courts. But a lot of our kind of traditional understanding of who used BJS data was researchers, and so we could put data sets in an archive on a web page, but those are not the kind of places that that works great if you have SAS on your computer and 40 hours to download a data set and to analyze it. That's not particularly useful when you're trying to answer questions quickly, and so we're working towards trying to make our data more generally accessible. We've been building several dashboards as one way that we do this, by trying to make it so that everybody, literally everybody, can click through a dashboard and try to find that key statistic or that key piece of information that they want. And you can expect to see a lot more of that from BJS as we kind of move towards trying to make our data, which we think is a significant resource and we spend a lot of time asking people to provide, more generally accessible so that people can make operational decisions using those data. So that's, I think, where our priorities are.
Thank you so much.
How are you folks doing today? Hope everybody's awake and excited to talk about cyber and information sharing. My name is Ernesto Ballesteros. I get to serve you all actually at the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. I serve as the state, or rather the Cybersecurity State Coordinator. It's an appointed role came out of about 2 years ago. It's 6 USC 665C. If you ever want to look it up, it's right there, the black letter. In very plain language, though, the role is really positioned to serve as the central focal point of the primary point of contact regarding cybersecurity matters between the federal government and the state that you serve. And so I serve the state of Texas. Now, confusingly, before I joined the agency, been there for about 2 years, I was the state cybersecurity coordinator for the state of Texas and the chairman of the Texas Cybersecurity Council at the Texas Department of Information Resources. That's a state agency that is not unlike CISA. In fact, I would probably say it's probably the closest equivalent as far as agencies are concerned in the state of Texas. In that role, under Texas Government Code 2054-511 and 512, was to oversee cybersecurity for the state of Texas, as well as lead the Texas Cybersecurity Council, primarily in addressing privacy and cybersecurity matters affecting the state. That's very broad, but I will tell you that it was very bureaucratic, and it was a lot of recommending as well as implementing laws that affect covered entities. Let's see here. I'm an adjunct law professor at St. Mary's University in San Antonio, Texas. Received my education there. All my student debt primarily comes from that law school. Prior to that, I did my bachelor's and master's in computer science, cybersecurity at Our Lady of the Lake University. It's a sister school. They also have a lot of student debt from me. And then, background as far as professional life, aside from public service, I was a professor for 10 years of computer science and cybersecurity. And I love serving folks. And so CISA is an excellent agency for folks that like to serve. The gentleman that just spoke before talked about true believers. We've got plenty of those at CISA. If you don't know who CISA is, we were, I guess we would say, probably the youngest federal civilian executive branch agency. Established in 2018, we're very clever, under the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Act of 2018. And our mission is actually very broad, and it's to understand and manage risks to the nation's critical infrastructure sectors. And as you all know, you probably read Presidential Policy Directive 21 and have it committed to memory. There are 16 critical infrastructure sectors that, if they were to be impacted in any kind of material way, it would really interfere with the ability of the federal government, further probably also with the local and state governments, to provide for the safety, security, and economic prosperity of the American people. And so what we endeavor to do, left of boom, is to, or rather pre-incident, is to make sure that folks have the information that they need in order to make informed decisions on how to not only invest in cybersecurity, but ultimately protect and sustain critical infrastructure that our neighbors, our friends, and then our states rely on. So that's what we do at CISA. I'll talk a little bit about that later.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. So, Rob, we're going to start with you. You made reference to an executive order and to different policies that are in place that help govern, help direct, offer guidance, and that's probably from an implementation standpoint the most appropriate description. Offer guidance on what are your mission areas and how, in fact, you are responsive to the states and local law enforcement community. What are those guidelines? What are those executive orders? And how are they sort of impacting your workload?
Yeah, the executive order that I referenced is Executive Order 14074. Those of you who are in law enforcement are probably familiar with this. This was signed by President Biden. I think it was May 25th of last year. So it's been about a year. It covers a lot of ground. It's extremely expansive. And the title's long, but it's essentially looking to reform some aspects of law enforcement and the criminal justice system to build trust and relationships between law enforcement and the communities they serve. Things like duty to intervene, earlier intervention systems, implicit bias, the use of deadly force, de-escalation, no-knock entries, data collection across a range of federal collection efforts is included in the executive order, as well as law enforcement accreditation. The last of which, accreditation, is an extremely large topic of discussion in the profession right now. It's an aspirational goal. The COPS office has been working with our partners at the state and national accreditation levels to try to advance accreditation. A rising tide lifts all boats is the notion, but essentially to bring some continuity across law enforcement agencies, given how we know that under our system of federalism, policing is a inherently local, largely local endeavor. Currently, only about 12% of law enforcement agencies nationwide are accredited by state or national accreditation entity. So there's a lot of work to do. It is an aspirational goal. However, the Section 19 of the executive order calls for advancements in accreditation and ties in some form discretionary federal grant funding to law enforcement agencies, to agencies and accreditation entities embracing a series of new standards, some of which appear in some form in existing sets of standards at the state or national level. Some are new. And so there's this patchwork of accreditation processes across states and at the national level. And essentially, Section 19 is attempting to bring some continuity across different topic areas. The COPS office was assigned to implement Section 19. It's an extremely ambitious effort just here in Texas alone. There are about 2,800 law enforcement agencies. Under 200 agencies are currently accredited, so about 6% in the state of Texas alone. So tying the adoption of these standards by the accreditation entities as well as moving the profession and the law enforcement agencies that are out there through accreditation processes is going to take a while. It's going to take capacity building among the state accreditation entities and at the national accreditation body, CALIA, largely. And it's going to create support for law enforcement agencies. It obviously takes resources, time, and other investments on the part of law enforcement agencies to undertake accreditation. So it's a really significant topic. The standards cover some of those topics that I mentioned that are referenced in other parts of the executive order. So it's extremely ambitious. It's going to be big for the profession. We know that there are groups, major county sheriffs and major city chiefs are meeting as we speak, and it's a big topic of discussion. And so that's going to be a big priority on the reform front for the COPS office in the months and years ahead.
I certainly have follow-up questions, but I want to sort of keep this, I'll give the opportunity to your peers to chat as well, but I will come back to you. Kevin, I know not only from what has been recently released, but the fact that IJIS, the Institute, as well as many of our members, have been supporting what were activities that were coming out of the Office of Science and Technology Policy. I know that Alex, your director, Alex Picaro, of course, was a co-chair on that committee that drove and produced what was a report. I don't want to get the name wrong, Equity and Law Enforcement Data Collection, Use, and Transparency. And in and of itself, the name is very clear. And the report itself, to the extent that I've been able to review it in some detail, but we've had lots of conversations already this week about how we would love to support that, is truly self-explanatory in the notion of the data access, the data usage, the data security by implication, and the transparency and usage for the community. And of course, the community is a very broad definition. Whatever you can share with us on that, I'm sure that our audience will be appreciative.
Works out well that you talk about Section 19 of the executive order. This is Section 18 of the executive order.
Alrighty then.
What happens in the federal government is you derive your identity by the section of the U.S. Code or by the executive order that drives your work agenda, I think. So Director Picaro, along with the Chief Data Scientist of the United States, were the co-chairs of a working group that produced the report. The report kind of has 5 courses of action that the recommendation, they're not formally recommendations, not suggestions, just observations. You can't make recommendations.
That's not what the report said, but okay.
The report said, yes.
I'm only kidding.
The report noted the importance of data, both the collection of data and the transparency of data, but also developing the capacity within state, tribal, local, territorial law enforcement agencies to use those data to drive their operations. So there's yes, the data are good, But there's a commitment, I think, to understanding that there needs to be the capacity both to collect that data and to use that data. And part of the, I think, responsibility from the federal government is kind of twofold. The first is the use case, is to explain why go through the trouble of collecting the data and trying to figure out ways to use that data in an operational environment. And again, technology is a force multiplier. I think that's a theme that's very consistent with IJIS's mission. And I think that the report echoes that theme as well. The other thing that I think that the federal government can do is try to figure out ways to collaborate and to bring people together and to help build that capacity. And I think those are the next steps from the perspective of the federal government, is understanding what the next steps are to help build that capacity, to help agencies use their own data, but also to try to encourage those agencies to share those data in a way that protects the security of the data and the privacy of the individuals who might be identified in those data in ways that can help demonstrate what the national patterns are beyond one agency, so that agencies understand that they're not in a unique situation, or perhaps that they are in a unique situation, but also to do that in a more timely manner. Because data that's a year and a half or 2 years old, particularly in law enforcement, has missed a lot, has missed a generation in a lot of ways. So I think trying to figure out ways to collect those data, harmonize those data, and report those data in a more timely manner is something that is both consistent with BJS's mission and something that the federal government should have the capacity to help state and local agencies do.
Wonderful. I thank you very much, and I will share not only with you, Kevin, but with the audience of our members. I just did have the opportunity to participate in that White House forum that then was, I think, referred to as a vendor day. I know that several of our members also responded to what was the RFI that collected information and input into the process. I mention these only to say that as I spoke about the top-down approach of understanding what the national priorities are and then understanding the domains and the partners that can be brought to the table and then the development of the solutions, this is one of the priorities that IJIS leadership, Home Office, community sees as extremely valuable, and one that can drive our ability to be able to support, right? Certainly there's a lot of information that we want to learn, and we'll do so over time. But at the end of the day, I can tell you we're talking about working groups to sort of slice and dice the report, provide some suggestions, and offer support. And that really does speak to each of the component parts here. I refer only to this most recent document because it was just released a couple of weeks ago. And I'm aware that your director and others are making sure that the audience is aware of its existence, and that the suggestions, albeit terminology, are very solid and very well thought out, and do seem to reflect the input that some of us were either contributing to or aware of. So we're grateful for the process. So Ernesto, talk to us about the trends that you are seeing, whether those are national trends, international trends, local trends. We know what can be out there by way of bad actors, but in these instances, whether or not it's related to reform, how is DHS CISA looking to support the communities that service our broader population? Yeah,
so, as far as some of the cyber threat and cyber risk trends that we're seeing, number one, probably no surprise, when Russia decided to invade Ukraine, there was an observable uptick in, I guess, increased risk of cyber attack on national critical infrastructure. But not just here, but also elsewhere in the world. And so that has a material impact. It poses a material risk to our ability to provide for the safety, security, and economic prosperity of the American people, but also to work with our allies. Now, some of the things that we've observed, I guess to speak very highly about it, a lot of folks are not patching. They're leaving their internet-facing infrastructure vulnerable. There could be a number of reasons why they're doing that. There could be perfectly reasonable explanations as to why they're doing that. Maybe they're just accepting the risk. Nevertheless, we do perform a number of assessments. One of them, it's a service actually that we provide. It's called the Cyber Hygiene External Vulnerability Scanning Service. We offer that free of charge. Organizations can sign up for it. It runs in perpetuity, and if you're not familiar with what a vulnerability scan is, those are carefully crafted packets that go across the internet to your internet-facing devices. And internet-facing devices, again, for those of you here and the folks that maybe don't have a comp sci background or a technical background, those are the devices that, for all intents and purposes, have an IP address that can be seen by anyone with a connection to the internet. And so it's tantamount to leaving your front door open or vulnerable. And so we perform these scans, and what we've been able to observe, by and large, across the 16 different critical infrastructure sectors, that there are a lot of vulnerable systems out there. Vulnerabilities could show up in outdated software. It could show up in poorly configured devices or services that are running on those devices that are internet facing. And then as far as what we're seeing, what's happening inside organizations. So you have what's internet facing, right? And then you have what's happening inside your trusted network. So we're talking about the practices that you engage in, the types of controls that maybe you have stood up, or maybe you just haven't for whatever reason. And we perform a number of assessments for organizations, and we find that there's a pretty significant degree, a lack of formalization in terms of policies, procedures, standards, and guidelines. So in other words, you have folks they've got an IT shop, maybe they have a cybersecurity component for their IT department at their organization. They're engaged in practices because they're professionals, but a lot of it isn't documented, and so therefore it isn't measurable. It's not repeatable. It's not predictable. And as you can imagine, that makes it very difficult to improve practices over time such that you would lower risk in a predictable manner. One other observation, big vulnerability here, is that a lot of organizations, they're kind of shooting from the hip. They don't have an incident response plan, okay? And so what is an incident response plan? It's exactly like what it sounds like. So this is the plan that you enact when events that are happening in your operating environment, many of these you cannot perceive with your God-given senses because they're cyber events, rise to the level of becoming so disruptive that now they're a cyber incident. And when that cyber incident kicks off, if you have a plan, you know that when a certain threshold is kicked off, that's kind of the inciting incident for you to go, all right, kick off the plan. And the plan is going to say, identify what the impacted assets are. Let's start figuring out how we're going to quarantine that off of the network in our organization. And then how are we going to recover and figure out after the fact what went well, what didn't go so well, and by the way, who's going to fix that? In a lot of organizations, that capability doesn't exist. And so we've been going out and try to help folks, whether it be by providing advice and counsel in person, performing assessments, or providing resources for folks to download off of our site on a voluntary basis. Nothing's compulsory in terms of cyber right now for standing up these kinds of capabilities. So we just, again, in very plain language, folks, people are just ill-prepared. And wanted to just kind of foot stomp one thing here. I mentioned the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, and right after that, we stood up what's called the Shields Up campaign. And in that campaign, it's still up there on our website. So in fact, it's the first thing you'll see on our website. It has a number of near-term steps that any organization, regardless of size, sophistication, or sector, can take right now. Probably should have been taking it 10 years ago, but if they could take it right now to really start to reduce the amount of risk and potential impact if an incident occurs.
That's excellent information, and I will say that when your director, Bridget Bean, or your assistant director, Bridget Bean, joined us, I want to say in the March timeframe when we held what was a cyber summit, and thankfully we're going to collaborate and run another session collectively in October. The whole community that was present was very keen on knowing what resources were available, understanding what the top priorities would be, understanding what the available sort of top tier issues that should be addressed if they didn't have a boatload of money. We understand that there's going to be some changes that agencies will have to address and need financial backing for. There's probably many more that's already absorbed in the fact that they have the resources to be able to do it. But as you said, for many reasons, some that we understand, some that we don't, they don't address this as a critical need, right, until something happens.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So Rob, getting back to you, you made reference to the agencies, the executive order. Are you seeing a trend that the agencies, understanding either the legislative direction, the policy direction, the support of improvement on the operational priorities, that they are coming to you and asking for guidance in each of these areas or soliciting services that they're looking for your support? Are you seeing those trends from the larger agencies or all agencies, or just as in the example of the CALIA and the relatively small 12% that have been accredited, are you seeing that that's a push that you/we, the broader community, need to help you with in order to realize success in those areas, that there's a reason why they should be accredited, right? We see that that sort of checks a lot of boxes of efficiency on many levels.
Yeah, I don't want to speak for especially the practitioners in the room, but the feedback that we've gotten is that by and large, a lot of the topics within the executive order are being embraced by law enforcement agencies. I think that they're much more ahead of the curve than some give them credit for. We did a number of consultations with law enforcement stakeholder groups, all the associations, as well as with civil rights and advocacy organizations and accreditation entities. And the accreditation entities are, in a lot of states, tied to the state chiefs or sheriff's associations. So there is a strong practitioner bent in those accreditation entities. But the substance of the standards that we developed, we got a lot of agreement on. Of course, it wasn't unanimous. There's not going to be consensus. But the vast majority of the new standards were accepted by the law enforcement stakeholders and the accreditation entities as being things that they are already striving towards and have made advancements on. So technical assistance, resources are always in need, especially in this day and age. And so I think it's a matter of providing those resources to law enforcement agencies to allow them to get to where they want to be. And that'll go a long way, I think, in satisfying the terms of the executive order. Notably, so we talk about reform, and it's a term that we try not to use a lot. Law enforcement, it's been our view that law enforcement advances and innovates and has always done so. And so whether you call that innovation or advancement or reform, there's a lot of common ground in the types of topics that folks talk about. But we were really appreciative to see that topics like law enforcement, mental health, and wellness were reflected as a need and a priority within the executive order. And of course, that's a topic that's very near and dear to our heart. We do have a small program that we administer. It started off as only $2 million in 2019 based on a report that the National FOP and the National Association of Police Organizations and IACP and others advocated for that for Congress to mandate the creation of a report of best practices and case studies. That was directed to the COPS office based on those reports. There was an initial appropriation of $2 million, a drop in the bucket. I mean, don't even really have to state that for a national program. But thankfully, we got a foothold, and the advocates for mental health and wellness funding and resources continue to work very hard. And so that's increased over the past several years. It currently stands at about $10 million. So every year we fund about 60 agencies to stand up programs like Chief Greenwald talked about, peer support and counseling programs, which have shown to be very effective, and the evaluation results are it's early, but are showing positive results. Family support programs, suicide prevention programs. So a lot of flexibility to implement and expand law enforcement mental health and wellness act programs. But I just wanted to note that, because when folks typically think reform, that doesn't come to mind immediately, but we were very thankful that is getting its due attention. We're hopeful that the resources will follow.
I appreciate that, and you're absolutely right. It's not a typical definition to the extent that any of us follow a definition, and truly we see it as the operational improvements, but that is a valued asset. I want to ask this of each of you. So, Rob, I'll at least get you thinking on how the IJIS community can help your organizational mission. Meaning we understand the executive order, we understand how the law enforcement community is coming to you and, as you say, being more proactive than maybe the community gives them credit for. But at the end of the day, are there areas that you need assistance so that we might be able to ultimately understand if we can provide those for you?
Yeah, I would say, so our funding and resources is really congressionally directed towards the law enforcement community, but you all are certainly critical partners and play an important role in public safety. I would say your voice. We say that to every law enforcement agency and group that we speak with. Your voices are compelling and they're powerful when you're speaking with policymakers and elected officials. And you do understand the needs and priorities. And so I think that your voice is important to folks who matter, folks who can influence and inform the policy direction as well as the funding that goes out to the profession. And so that would certainly be one way. The other way that I think is helping us, because we believe that innovation happens at the ground level. And so we provide a lot of flexibility in our grant programs to allow agencies to incubate good ideas, because we know that that's where innovation happens in law enforcement. And we really just seek to observe the implementation processes and learn from the lessons that are experienced, and then to amplify that to the rest of the profession. But you all certainly are practitioners yourselves, and so I would say to help us understand what the needs of the field are, and we'd love to keep open the lines of communication. And we think, again, it's a great benefit, a huge benefit for the Department of Justice, and certainly the COPS office to have someone at the lead of our agency who comes from the profession, because they know firsthand the experiences and the challenges that you all face. But having Director Clements there to partner and collaborate with you all on shared priorities, I think would be important moving forward.
Wonderful. We are grateful, and we will definitely look forward to that and follow up on that. So, Kevin, you know the question is coming. We sort of sliced and diced, or we're in the process of slicing and dicing the report, but that is the most recent, and I won't say an insignificant part, but that's, of course, not the whole of BJS. Talk to us about how you think our community might be able to help the BJS priorities, keeping, I mean, the obvious notion of the data access, the data holders, the data facilitators, right? Not the data owners by any means, but certainly the data facilitators. And how might we be able to help your cause and your mission?
I'm just going to sit here and echo everything that Rob says. And I think voice is kind of a nice way to put it. And I think voice comes in two roles. The first is to kind of advocate, right? To kind of say, to speak up for data is something that we very much want to be kind of part of that choir, but this is a great place to kind of amplify that. And so without kind of taking particular policy stands, and I don't think there's deep-seated opposition to data, it's a question of priorities. And so trying to figure out improving data collection and the use of data in law enforcement agencies in particular is something that we encourage, we want to try to figure out ways to collaborate with and to encourage that prioritization. So that's, I think, the first way the voice works for us. And then the second way is to talk to us. We have not, I'm not saying we're insular, hopefully we're not insular, but we rarely do affirmative outreach, I think is the best way to do it. I think that Director Picaro has kind of pushed us a little bit to kind of make sure that we're coming to talk to communities like this, but it's to talk to us, to tell us what you're seeing, where you think that we can help, and where your pain points are. And so we want to take all that in. I think the process with the working group, both with the forum and then the request for information where we got a whole lot of people's opinions, that's great. I really enjoy having to kind of pick through all of that information, because it's seeing kind of what priorities, we have our vision of the priorities, but understanding what other people think the priorities are for kind of data. And so I think continuing to speak up to us is part of that as well.
Okay, I appreciate that, and I'll make 2 points. The first one is be careful what you ask for, because if you're asking for input, these are not bashful people. And then the second thing is, as much as I certainly agree with you that the infusion of all the responses from the RFI is probably very interesting, et cetera, and in response to that, I will say, and in sharing information with the group, I will say that with these discussions that we've had, limited discussions that, though they be, of us wanting to slice and dice the report. Our hope is then to create a potential framework, or maybe a phased plan, that then we get input from our community, from our industry, so that it is, I won't say a mirror reflection of everybody's opinion, but that it is more of a strategy than here's 14 different ways of doing something that then you have to figure it out. And again, that's not something that we've started, so don't think that you haven't been invited to the table yet, but we were busy with this, and we will now get back to what is very valuable work, and we'll get into that report and invite participation. Thank you. Okay, Ernesto, what could we do for you?
So number one, thank you for having me out here. Just getting the opportunity to engage our stakeholders, whether they want to work with us or not, getting to make a compelling argument in favor of doing so on a voluntary basis is great. That's exactly what we need. Most folks have never heard of CISA. One day they will. Hopefully it won't happen after a catastrophe occurs. With that said, aside from having opportunities to raise awareness about not only who we are, but how we go about accomplishing really a very broad and aspirational mission of, again, understanding and managing risk to the nation's critical infrastructure sector. One of the things I want to foot stomp here is that we do so on a voluntary basis, whether that be physical security, or it's right there, the first word in the name of the agency, cybersecurity matters. So for everyone in here in the room, you're going to fall squarely under one of those or many of those 16 critical infrastructure sectors. And without spending all day talking about this, because I certainly can, we provide no cost, rather you have paid for these as taxpayers, cybersecurity resources that you can consume either just by downloading them off our websites, or what I would encourage you to do is engage either your state cybersecurity coordinator. If you're in Texas, it's nice to meet you. I am your state cybersecurity coordinator. Alternatively, depending on where you live in the great state of Texas, God bless Texas, by the way, you can also interface with your cybersecurity advisor. Okay, so cybersecurity advisors are subject matter experts in cybersecurity. These are former CISOs, these are former CIOs. Again, we hire true believers, but these folks are very well qualified, and they can come out there and they can provide advice and counsel on cybersecurity matters. Furthermore, they can also provide resources. We can do cybersecurity assessments. Who doesn't want to know where they're at in terms of cyber, and then charting out a path towards where do we want to move the needle towards more mature, more repeatable, more predictable. We've talked about information sharing here. Information sharing is a topic that's near and dear to my heart. When I was a state bureaucrat here in Texas, I had an unfunded mandate. It was under Texas Government Code. I think it was 2054-510, something like that. It was standing up the Texas Information Sharing and Analysis Organization. We're talking about that today. I would encourage you to take a look at the Texas ISA. If you're a Texas entity here, okay, sharing of cybersecurity information could be cyber threat indicators, it could be defensive measures, it could be best practices, and doing so in a manner that is consistent with providing for the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of that information, protecting your information under the Cybersecurity and Information Security Sharing Act of 2018, confusingly also CISA 2015. I'm going to leave my contact information here with the host here. You can get to us at CISA.gov, but the regions are broken up. There's 10 different regions. I live here in Texas. All my debt's from here. I've got skin in the game. My babies are here. Property's here. As far as I'm concerned, Texas is the most important. If you're from Texas, I serve you, and I look forward to working with you.
Thank you very much. And we'll try to help you with that debt if there's any way possible. So now I'm going to open it up. I know we won't take too long, but I do want to open it up for any audience questions. That's a lot of information, not only that we provided you with this panel with this morning, but questions from the audience? I said you weren't there. Here we go. Yeah. Chris?
This is specifically for Ernesto, and maybe it's a state-related question, but maybe at the federal level as well. What is CISA doing to assist state and locals with supply chain risk planning?
That's an excellent question. So we publish a lot of advisories, bulletins, so we're letting you know whether or not we see something that could potentially affect supply chain. Let's say a vendor, for instance, maybe there's some issue there. But what we do, aside from publishing information that might be relevant to you, depending on your operating environment, we go out there and we perform assessments for you. We do an assessment what's called the External Dependency Management Assessment. That is federal speak for essentially how do you manage risk that arises out of relying on other parties to produce your critical services. We all do that. We don't produce our own electricity. We don't provide our own water. We certainly, in a lot of cases, we also don't develop our own software and provide our own cloud-based, software as a service or platform as a service. And so we perform assessments like the EDM or External Dependency Management Assessment. I do many of them that help an organization assess how well they manage risk across the life cycle of engaging third parties, from the point that you're contemplating working with a third party. Also, once you've already started working with a third party, and they're certainly going to be part of the supply chain there, steps that you can take to mitigate or rather reduce risk, again, that arises out of relying on them. A lot of this is contractual. And then, God forbid, an incident occurs, how well prepared are you to actually work with a lot of those vendors or those third parties that you rely on that are in that whole supply chain to respond and recover and get back to a pre-incident state. So those are the two big things that we're doing for supply chain.
Thank you. Other questions? All righty. There we go. David?
Just a question for Ernesto. Overall, do you see the situation getting worse or better when you do these vulnerability scans? On balance, is the community getting better, or are you seeing the threats outpacing management of those threats?
Well, that's a difficult question to answer. I'm going to do my best. What I will tell you is this, and hopefully you're going to have to excuse me if I just spout a couple of truisms here. The threat actors are certainly becoming more sophisticated, and the threshold as far as being able to launch a sophisticated attack, you don't have to be a sophisticated actor anymore. A lot of the attacks are kind of point and click, pointed at an IP address and you're good to go. What we have observed is that so not only the threats, the threat actors, their sophistication is increasing, and in a lot of cases it is outpacing organizations' ability to defend against those threats. It's our observation, though, that organizations that work with us or work with other organizations and are taking proactive measures, whether they're compelled to do so by some sort of statute or regulation, or maybe some sort of industry self-regulation like PCII, something like that. Those are the folks that we see where their risk is coming down because they're taking proactive measures. But by and large, yeah, it does appear to be the case that the threat actors are becoming increasingly sophisticated, and their ability to attack us is really kind of outpacing our ability to defend. Yeah.
I was just going to say, that's not a good note to end on, but let's see if we have one more question.
But to that end, that's why we're out here. That's why we exist, yes. And that's why we're getting out there and we're extolling the virtues of good cyber defensive practices. And so we have to start somewhere. And for some organizations, many organizations have a tremendous amount of responsibility, very, very few resources to actually contend with those, or to meet those responsibilities and contend with the threat. And so I'm blessed to be in a position where I work for an agency where we get to go out and do the people's work and help those folks the best that we can.
That was a very nice turnaround. That was very well done, Ernesto. Thank you so much for that tone. All right, any other questions? All right, I'm glad to say that the directors will be with us for the balance of at least no less than the day. So if you want to grab them and chat, please do so. I thank you all for joining us, sharing your knowledge. You will be hearing from us, so sorry about that. But we do look forward to collaboration with you.